There is someone you can't forget, not because they treated you well, but because they brought out something in you, something raw, dark, and unnameable. They didn't offer you peace. They ignited storms. You were not your best self with them. You were something else entirely, more reactive, more exposed, more alive, but in a way that hurt. And that pain, that lingering obsession, is not about romance. It's about the soul meeting its shadow. Carl Jung taught us, everything we exile within, our rage, shame, intensity, vulnerability, doesn't disappear. It waits, until one day it finds a mirror in another. And Joe Dispenza showed us that our nervous system holds on to the identity we created in pain, that we can become chemically bonded to the self we met in conflict, in projection, in emotional survival. So maybe this person was never just a person. Maybe they were your shadow, in a body. This isn't about healing by forgetting. It's about remembering what part of you lived in them and what that part still wants to reclaim. Let's begin. You thought he judged you, dismissed you, made you feel small. But what if the truth is far more haunting? What if he didn't create that feeling, but simply mirrored the part of you you've spent years pretending wasn't there? The shadow doesn't hate, it reveals. It says, look at what you've buried, and it uses another's eyes to do it. You wanted to be loved, but what if he touched the place in you that never believed love was deserved? That's not just heartbreak, that's archetypal confrontation. It's why the thoughts loop, why your body remembers, why his presence, even in absence, feels like residue in your chest, like a mirror with a single crack that keeps reflecting the flaw you avoid. He didn't destroy you, he exposed you. And that's why you can't forget him. There are people whose touch we forget. But then there are those whose mere presence altered our inner chemistry, who entered not just through words or gestures, but like a wave that rewired something deep within. You weren't merely in love, you were chemically rearranged. Your nervous system didn't just register affection, it recorded the intensity of being seen in a way that felt unbearable. And now, even in silence, your body waits for the next echo, not because it wants reunion, but because it remembers the voltage. Joe Dispenza speaks of this as the identity born from emotional imprint, how the body seeks not peace, but familiarity, even when that familiarity is pain. So when you ask, why can't I forget? Maybe it's because forgetting would require a new self to be born, one who is no longer shaped by that mirror. What he triggered in you etched itself into your biology like fire carved into wood, invisible to the eye, but irreversibly changed beneath the surface. This wasn't just an encounter, it was an initiation. And your memory, your obsession, your ache is the body's way of holding on to the only time it felt everything at once: fear, desire, exposure, loss. Not because it was safe, but because it was real. There is a moment in every story of emotional upheaval when we look back and wonder, was it all a mistake? Was he toxic? Or was there something else beneath the chaos? The mind longs for clear answers. The soul, however, speaks in paradox. What if he wasn't your enemy, but your own shadow dressed in human skin? What you hated in him, the arrogance, the coldness, the refusal to choose you, was not foreign. It was intimately familiar, because it was yours. The part of you that you've never allowed to exist, the power you've exiled, the indifference you fear becoming. Carl Jung reminded us, what we don't own within ourselves, we end up seeing in others, and then we try to destroy them because we're too afraid to integrate what they reflect. And so, he became unbearable, not because he harmed you, but because he mirrored a frequency you had buried. Cutting the bond doesn't erase the shadow, it just shifts it into the next person, the next face, the next ache. Like Persephone resisting Hades, believing he was the darkness, when in truth he was the gatekeeper to her own underworld. And maybe that's why you can't stop looking back. Not because he was right for you, but because he showed you the version of yourself you're still learning to face. There are obsessions that don't speak of love, but of the pain of looking away from oneself for too long. You said you stayed because you loved him, but love, real love, doesn't leave you fractured. It doesn't silence your truth to keep someone else close. Maybe what you felt wasn't devotion, but a refusal to face what he made visible in you. He didn't offer you safety. He reflected your deepest vulnerability, and that confrontation, though unbearable, was also magnetic, because he didn't just challenge you, he exposed you to your fears, your hunger, your longing to be chosen without having to pretend. You weren't addicted to his presence. You were addicted to the version of yourself that only existed through his rejection. The Jungian path teaches us that we chase what we fear to become. We return to the pain not to be hurt again, but because part of us was left behind. You burned like a candle in a sealed room, bright, intense, but suffocating. Longing for air, but terrified of extinguishing the flame. You didn't stay for him. You stayed for the part of you that wanted to be seen, even if it meant bleeding. And that is not weakness. It's the beginning of awakening. You didn't just love him. You gave him pieces of you you never gave yourself permission to hold. Your anger, your sensuality, your unspoken hunger, your forgotten power. And once he carried them, he became impossible to release. He awakened something, yes, but not something dark, something repressed, something sacred, something waiting. And when he walked away, or refused to stay, he didn't just leave with your heart. He left carrying fragments of who you could have been. You blamed him for the weight, but that weight was yours. In Jungian language, this is projection, but in the soul's language, this is longing for reintegration. You don't miss him. You miss the parts of you he unknowingly held, like a sorceress who cast her magic into another, then forgot her own power, until the silence began to ache louder than his name. This isn't a call to cleanse the memory. It's an invitation to retrieve what was exiled, because the obsession isn't a sign of dependence. It's a symbol of your soul trying to return to its wholeness. There was a moment when everything shifted, when you no longer saw him as a man, but as a mirror of all that you believed you lacked. He became the one who decided, who had the final word, who carried the gaze that made you feel either chosen or erased. And in that imbalance, you shrank. Not because he took your power, but because it felt safer to give it away than to hold it trembling in your own hands. The psyche does this when it's afraid. It places the crown on someone else's head, believing that if they hold it, maybe we won't be destroyed by its weight. But the pain of giving away your sovereignty is a slow erosion. You start to forget who you were before him, before the hierarchy, before you confused being wanted with being worthy. Carl Jung whispered of this inner reversal, that what we deny in ourselves, we exalt in another. And so he became the beloved, the chooser, the one with perceived power. But what if the truth is simpler and more devastating? What if the reason he felt so powerful was because he held the part of you that never believed it could be loved without needing to be small? Like placing your voice in another's mouth and wondering why silence hurts so much. You were never beneath him. You just forgot the weight of your own name. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You tried to be kind, to rise above, to love from a place of calm and detachment. But something inside you trembled, a scream behind the silence, a storm beneath the stillness. Because the war was never truly with him. It was between the parts of you you kept apart, like enemies. The spiritual self, serene, wise, forgiving, and the hidden self, angry, wounded, raw. You wanted to be the higher version of you, the one who lets go with grace. But you were also the one who felt abandoned, unseen and split open, and no amount of pretending could stitch that divide. Carl Jung called this the tension of opposites, when the persona tries to perform light while the shadow bleeds beneath it. And perhaps that's why it all cracked. Because love that doesn't include the shadow is not love. It's a costume. The temple you tried to build with prayers, affirmations, and restraint was sacred, yes, but it stood on a fault line. And the trembling you feel, the emotional earthquakes that come without warning, are not signs of failure. They are reminders. You cannot build wholeness on self-rejection. He wasn't the enemy. He was just the tremor that made you realize the fracture was always yours. The longing that lingers is not for the man who left, but for the self that shimmered briefly in his gaze. The part of you that dared to burn, even as the world tried to smother the flame. He didn't truly see you, not as others imagined seeing, but he triggered a glimpse of what you might become if you dared to claim your own fire. This is the paradox of the shadow dance. He wasn't the source of your light, but its reflection in darkness. Jung said, "What we don't make conscious appears as fate." Dispenza teaches that the body clings to identity through repeated emotional patterns. So perhaps the reason you can't forget him is because your soul refuses to forget who it was meant to become in the mirror he held up to you, like a phoenix rising, not from the ashes of the past, but from the part of herself that finally burned clean. This is not about reclaiming a lost love. It's about reclaiming yourself, the one who was silenced, forgotten, but never truly gone. The shadow is not your enemy. It is unlived life, waiting for you to remember it with tenderness. There is a silence that follows obsession, a quiet space where the soul leans close to listen beyond the noise of longing. You are not mad for carrying his echo, nor weak for the shadows he stirred within you. This is the soul's language, a call to come home to the parts you left in another's gaze. What did he hold that you now must gather? What fragment of yourself, once exiled, is ready to be cradled with gentle hands? Remember, the shadow is not a curse. It is unlived life, a hidden garden waiting to bloom. Jung spoke of fate as the shadow we refuse to know. Dispenza showed us the body's devotion to what it remembers. And so, perhaps the reason he lingers is because your soul refuses to forget who it was meant to become in the quiet mirror of his reflection. Let the echo settle, let the silence deepen, and in that stillness, may you meet the self who waits, whole and unafraid. If this journey has touched you, share this sacred space by whispering below, "Estoy despierta,"